Welcome back, everyone, and welcome, Alex. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, so we wanted to talk to you about scholarships, basically geared towards Hispanic and or Latinx students.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah.
So what qualities are, I mean, obviously some of them seem pretty obvious, but let's dig into the qualities that colleges or other scholarship agencies might be looking for in those scholarships,
Yeah.
recipients.
Yeah. Well, elephant in the room, like membership, right? So like a membership, a connection. How does the student identify in the Latinx community or Hispanic community? Kind of, and that is kind of up to the student. I always say, like, how do you, connect with your identity when you're submitting your application. So there's no like checklist, there's no like um, um, litmus test, I guess, of saying, okay, am I Latino enough or not? And so really it comes down to kind of who you are, how you identify, maybe even how you're categorized in other spaces as well. You might not have given thought of like, oh, what is my identity in this space? But maybe you've experienced being categorized in that space as well. And so that might say like, oh, I might be a Latino, like that question could come up. And so that's one thing. In addition to that, like your relationship to the community. So qualities that scholarships are going to look for or might ask you in an application might be the relationship that you have in the community. And that could range from a lot of different things. Your family, how is that dynamic? What are those cultural cues or experiences that you have, or their history as well? It could be your relationship related to school or the community at large, or community organization where you live, your neighborhood, other things like that. So yeah, and then like all scholarships, your commitment to learning and education. So oftentimes, like, this is kind of that question of like, are we looking for strong academic students? I have to be a 4.0 or I have to be outstanding. Well, in some cases, some colleges or scholarships are going to look for that, but also they're going to look at how you are learning about yourself, how's your experience influenced how you learn, or kind of what your relationship to education is. That could be inside and outside of the classroom too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it could even be that you're volunteering in your community. I mean, could it be something like that? Could be clubs at schools. I had an interesting discussion at a sort of admission counselor boot camp about kind of also like a young woman. This isn't directly related, although kind of tangentially, but she lived on a reservation. She was a Native American student, and she wasn't directly involved in any activities sort of for Native American students, but and some people thought, well, if we're going to give her a scholarship for that, she should be involved. And I said, but she lives on a reservation. She's part of a majority culture where she is. So doing something kind of explicitly around that rubric is sort of not a necessary thing. And when she went to college, where she was part of then a minority instead of a majority, she then did join organizations around sustaining that community and sustaining her identity within that community. So I was just wondering, if you had comments on that.
Yeah, no, and as high school students, I mean, I've been there. I identify as Latinos, Latino male, and yeah, your kind of identity ebbs and flows with the environment that you're in. And so, and you guys talked a lot about like, what does it mean to be a Hispanic or Latino or Chicano studies major, or how and college can be a place where that that identity like thrives or changes, or and maybe your high school experience wasn't necessarily that way because there wasn't the opportunity, whether you were in the majority or minority or kind
Mhm.
of an in between. um and so yeah, I think that, but there is something said about like your experience and where you're at, and providing kind of a reflective view. So you might have to like kind of think about that question rather than kind of say, oh, okay, checkbox, captain of this, president of this, or participated in this. um that's where that essay really comes into play, and that question of like, what is your relationship to the community. But I think there's threads, like leadership can look very different in different spaces. You could be a leader at home, you could
Mhm.
be you could be a leader at school. It could be the reverse. I think learning from your experiences, maybe it was something that might be negative, um, that you kind of changed or kind of experienced, and then like kind of learned a little bit about maybe the world, or society, and then or about yourself, as well. I know I've sat on those review committees,
Mhm.
and yeah, I think the students that shine, are those students that kind of, maybe tackle that. Maybe, and again, maybe it's not fully thought out, it's not magnificent, but that they're you're seeing the realization, or the glimpse, or the desire, or the connection. I think those
Mhm.
really help.
Right, like they're wrestling with it, at least they're thinking about it and thinking about what it means.
Yeah,
But and let's be fair, as you said, they're in high school, but also I think people wrestle with and think about issues of identity throughout their life.
yeah,
So, that's going to be understood. So I think this is a really important introduction because I think people sometimes talk about it as if these issues of identity are easy, and they're not. They're not at all. And so I think, and I, yeah, so I think it's really good and really important that we address this kind of to start out with, that these are actually complex things. But the good news is the agencies are pretty open. They just want to hear how
yeah,
you're thinking about it.
yeah,
So,
yeah. And I think that's the kind of the behind the curtain moment, is that
mm,
a lot of these reviewers, myself included, is like, we have experienced that. We've been in your shoes. And so it is kind of a place to kind of dance with these ideas a little bit more comfortably than you might feel than, turning in a term paper or reflective to, um, someone outside of the community, where you're having to explain. There are some kind of, um, I guess, opportunities to have some kind of common experiences that can be shared.
mhm,
And as reviewers, we're advocating for you. We want to see those things. We want to
mhm,
see those demonstrated leadership, responsibility, active learning, but that you're on the other side of an issue, um, moving forward. Because ultimately, we want you to be successful, but we're giving you that license to be, and that's why we're asking those questions.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So hopefully that helps somewhat. I know it sounded vague, but what we're trying to say, I think overall, is just go for it because, they're
Yeah.
really going to be open. So go for it. Do some thinking, but go for it. So, so if a student thinks they want to apply for these scholarships, like where should they start searching for them?
Yeah, yeah, great. Like, so where do you start searching? I like, kind of like a pro tip is use your scholarship engines. So
Mhm.
those are great. Scholarships, .com, Going Merry, FastWeb, but I like to utilize them in the directories. So
Mhm.
you can create the profile, but use the directories, because a lot of those websites and search engines will already have categorized, some of that information for you. I will say that typically they are more national scholarships that are found in those search engines. And those are great. They target the Latino community. So Hispanic Scholarship Fund. There might be larger professional or national organizations like National Association for Hispanic Nurses. Even the airlines are involved. So Southwest has a unique scholarship where you get credit or almost like one-way tickets because they know that travel for students can be a barrier, and so that's how you can apply for those, and you can do that throughout your whole college career as well. And they might have also be open to like just general diversity or minority scholarships as well, because those are you could be a part of that kind of target group. Where the search engines can fall short is your regional and local scholarships. And so these are really where you could shine when we're thinking about you as a student. So your local scholarships could be based on membership. There are farm worker families of farm worker scholarships or dependent scholarships. They could be regions of unions or credit unions where your state or your region you could be eligible for those types of scholarships. So think about that. In addition to that, think local. So local communities, local organizations, community organizations, community centers, churches that have predominantly Latino or Hispanic populations, Chamber of Commerce, and professional networks and organizations might target students in this population as well. They're typically they start scholarships because they want to give back. And you live in that region, you live in that community, and they're giving back to that student population there. And they can have a wide range of scholarships there. I was on a scholarship committee that didn't take the top 10% of students. It really looked at like that B student, maybe that C plus student, because we saw that like, hey, college could elevate you. And we really, and a couple of board members were in that space and needed that chance when they were students. And so that scholarship kind of guided them to that kind of the criteria or our kind of target student.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think some scholarships are really going to understand that high school students are not fully actualized yet often, but there could be a ton of potential there that they're showing. Maybe their grades are Bs, which are solid, but not, as you said, top 10%, but maybe they're showing that potential in other areas. So I want to give a plug too. I used to be a high school counselor, and I want to give an extra plug for what you mentioned with these local scholarships. I only had one student out of the 6 years that I was a high school counselor make it to the first round of the Coca-Cola scholarship. But I had a lot of students, if they bothered applying for these small scholarships from the National Charity League or the Lions Club or something like that, that would get an interview and get a scholarship. And, it was $1,000, but it was $1,000. So that really matters too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've been on those boards, and you're like, oh, and then sometimes those scholarships are open next year for that next group of students because you're members of the community. So yeah.
All right. So we only have like 1 minute. Can you give us some strategies for students to stay focused as they're doing this?
Yeah. Build a timeline. So you have a lot on your plate as a senior. You have college applications, financial aid, your school work. Build your timeline of when those scholarships are going to be available. Target scholarships. So, do the research, be organized up front, and then have that plan. So target those scholarships that you meet and exceed the expectation. That's your niche. And then quality over quantity. Take the time with these local scholarships, put that effort in. That can really go a long way, especially if you're kind of in that middle bubble. Putting that extra time can really, really change the application. You get over the hump, and then it's really that review committee that you're communicating with. So that essay is important.
All right, great. So thank you so much, Alex.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. I want to also thank Pablo Torres of the University of New Mexico and Niall Relay, my new college coach colleague. Be sure to tune in next week if you're a working parent, as we'll be honoring you for Working Parent Day. We'll also be answering listener questions, so lots of good reasons for joining us. And finally, I want to remind you that you don't have to listen to our shows live. Every show is accessible 24/7 on the Voice America website. And you can also download every show for free on iTunes. And last, don't forget, we're here every Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific.